1 in 4 men in the UK suffer from low testosterone, often without knowing it. Symptoms like low energy, poor sleep, and a lack of focus can take a serious toll, but they don't have to. That's why we're partnering with Manual to urge you to take an easy at-home testosterone test with 45% off. Join 30,000 men already benefiting from the testosterone replacement service, with 86% reporting improved energy and quality of life in just 3 months. I took a test early this week and will be reporting back on my results on next week's show.
I've done mine.
Yeah. You all good?
So, well, suboptimal apparently.
Okay,
So
okay.
if I bring suboptimal energy to the podcast, that's why. And it's
Well, you can take back control and save 45% on your testosterone test with the code weekly45 at checkout. England have won a game of cricket in 2025. This is not a drill. The England men's side picked up their first win of the year in Rajkot on Tuesday to give Brendan McCullum his first win as white ball head coach. I'm Yas Rana, and with me today are Matt Roller and Ben Gardner. Mark Butcher will be joining us later in the show, as will pod favourite Dan Lawrence, who Katya Witney catches up with at the ILT20 about his winter, but also his brief return with England last summer. Before we start, a reminder of what we've got over on our Patreon. Dailies after every day of England international cricket, so we're very, very busy at the moment, as well as an additional weekly show every week. So last week we looked at some of the great individual performances in series defeats. This week we have the latest episode of In the Bubble. This time it's Graham Onions who sits down for an hour with Joe Harmon about his career in the game. There's a very entertaining bit where he gives his unfiltered response to being told that he wasn't going to make the plane for the Ashes in 2013 after taking 150 wickets at 15 in the previous 2 years. It's along the lines of, are you joking, Jeff Miller? Speaking of the Patreon, we've got a question in on the Patreon for Matt before we start. It's a question from Chris, who just asks, actually, he says, my wife wants to ask, what is your secret to such youthful looks?
Oh, wow. I wish I knew. It's a good skincare routine, and also genetics, I think. But yeah.
I'm just genetically this good looking. Yeah.
No, I think the young face is it's a blessing and a curse, and I think it will become more of a blessing as I get older.
Well answered. Anyway, India are 2-1 up against England since the last pod. India nicked a nail biter on Saturday thanks to a brilliant guiding hand from Tilak Varma before England came roaring back in the third. Adil Rashid and Ben Duckett among England's star performers. Matt, 3 games in to the McCullum white ball era. Are there any signs of McCullum's fingerprints on this team? Is it in the makeup of the seamers? Ben and I were trying to work out yesterday, is this the quickest group of England seamers they have ever fielded in any international ever, with 4 guys bowling 140k plus?
Yeah, quite possibly. I think that the pace has been one of the obvious things, and I suppose it feels like it fits quite well with the McCullum mantra generally, that England have picked a team that is very much focusing on their strengths rather than perceive weaknesses of the opposition. Well, maybe it is to some extent, but they're not worried too much about conditions. They're saying, what have we got? We've got a lot of guys that bowl quick. We want to get overs into them and get experience into them in Asia before a Champions Trophy. And I think one of the key things as well has been how, I suppose, aggressively Buttler has used some of those guys. I mean, Archer in particular has bowled a lot of overs in his first spell. He obviously bowled 4 when they were defending a low total in the first game, and has bowled a lot in the power play generally. And that was kind of a classic McCullum move towards the back end of his captaincy with New Zealand. He would, one of Bolt and Southey would often bowl a really long new ball spell, either 3 or 4 overs in a T20, or sometimes 7 or 8 overs in an ODI. So I think those are the main things. Obviously, they have gone really hard with the bat. You can't accuse them of not using their resources, because I think they've lost 28 wickets in exactly 60 overs. So
really making use of Mark Wood and Adil Rashid.
Exactly, yeah. So I think there's been a bit of a sign of his mark on the team so far. Butler's obviously, I don't know, this dates back to the Caribbean as well, but occasionally had some pretty funky field sets with leg slips in and short leg. And partly that's because England typically have been a little bit under par with the bat, but I think there's some signs of it. But obviously, at 2-1 down in the series, it's not been complete plain sailing so far.
And part of it in the bowling attack Ben, is not just the big names in Jofra Archer and Mark Wood. In the last 2 games, it's Bryden Castle, who has a middling T20 record in domestic cricket. At best, he's had 2 very good games. And Jamie Overton, who, with the bat, he's been coming in probably 5 or so overs earlier than you'd probably want him to. And he's coming in against spin, which isn't really his strength. But he's bowled very well, particularly yesterday.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's interesting talking about those two, because you might look at like some of their records with the ball in T20 cricket and think, what are these guys up to? Then you've got to actually remember the conditions they're bowling in. We talk about it in county cricket, the pitch you get to play on sometimes, like, extreme pace isn't the way to go in the county championship, but that can sometimes also be the case in the T20 Blast. You get some small grounds out there as well. And I think also they're just backing themselves to take these guys and make them better, given that the raw materials that they've got. So I think that's part of it, and it will partly come down to captaincy, and I think that's also one of the, as Matt says, looking at what Butler's doing in the field and seeing him trying things. But it's just such an interesting marriage, those two. And when you had Ben Stokes and Brendan McCullum, you clearly had such kindred spirits there. Guys who barely have to talk to know what the other's thinking, kind of thing. Whereas I don't think with Butler and McCullum, that's quite that same vibe, but that doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. You might think that maybe they can sort of, pull each other in good directions possibly. And when when Butler's kind of come under fire in the past, it's probably been because of being a bit too rigid at times. Maybe, we had in that T20 World Cup where guys were kind of keeping their place in the side based in conditions that were very different to where they were playing next, kind of thing.
4-seamers in Guyana there.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, now they're playing 4-seamers in India.
True.
But
Yeah, I mean, on England's batting, they're 2-1 down, and you'd say that the batting has been the reason why they are down in the series. How much can a coach do about a squad's perceived weakness against spin? Because we'll get into the numbers in a bit. But you'd say Butler and Duckett aside, this is a side that has a really strong preference for pace.
Yeah, I suppose, you could ask the questions about selection and batting orders and that sort of thing, as to what a coach can control. But yeah, obviously you're right. If your players are struggling to pick a mystery spinner out of the hand, it's not something, especially given how tight the turnarounds are in modern white ball series. It's not like you can go to the nets and call in a load of net bowlers who are going to be able to mirror Varun Chakravarti very easily. So yeah, it's obviously something that the players need to work out to some extent. And I think there have been some signs of that. Like Livingston obviously took down Bishnoi in Rajkot, having struggled in the first couple of games. And I think there are I think in the case of players like Brook, I think it'll be a big learning experience for him. He's obviously he's not played very much cricket at all in India, barring that one IPL season. This is his first time there in international cricket. And I think Brook generally, if you were to be harsh, this would, playing spin in spin friendly conditions is the one sort of big question mark over him at the moment, because he's obviously, I think, extremely competent on very slow, low pitches, like we saw in Multan in that first test of that test tour. But then in the second and third test, he did really struggle, and it's been tough for him in this series too. So I don't think the coach can do a huge amount about it, other than maybe you could ask whether they've selected the team right. Maybe they need a bit more touch in there. Maybe someone, Overton, for example, is probably coming in a spot early. I think you could make a decent case that Bethel should have played it in Rajkot, but I suppose that's that tricky thing of these series where England would probably rather lose 3-2 and feel like they'd learned a lot and exposed players to difficult situations than win 3-2 but not have learned anything.
Yeah, I think on the makeup of the 11, I think I actually like Overton at 7 basically anywhere in the world other than India. The issue is that the next World Cup's in India and Sri Lanka, and it's not really his fault that that's the case as well. I think it's actually more to do with how early he is likely to come in this makeup of a side. If you look at the England players' overall career record against spin versus pace, it is really stark. So Butler averages 43 and strikes 141 against spin. Duckett 35 and 147. That's very good. Salt actually maybe better than people expect. He averages 29, strikes 135 against spin. But then the others, Liam Livingston had a career strike rate of 100 against spin before yesterday. So it's 108 now after he took down Bishnoi. Harry Brook, career record against spin and T20Is, 274 runs at 16, strike rate of 118. That was from a decent sample size as well. And with Salt, his career numbers are quite interesting because he's played half his career in the Caribbean, and it's quite hard to work out actually, what's he like against the best bowlers in the world outside of the Caribbean. Would you be tempted to change the order with someone like Brook in particular? It doesn't feel like it makes sense to use him as someone who's likely to come in against spin in the middle overs when he has such a preference for pace.
Yeah, I guess so. Except, when you lay out those numbers, it sounds like the obvious thing to do would be to put Duckett in the middle order, and to put Brook up to open where he can hopefully get to play some pace. The two tricky things there is, one, Duckett batted brilliantly in the power play yesterday. In a very Duckett way, hitting boundaries. Obviously, he hit a couple sixes, but hitting boundaries is real strength, and that's much more maximised in the power play where you get it through the infield. It's away for 4. But then you also run the risk, if you move Duckett down, of actually having an opening pair, and that's when you can almost most maximise matchups because you know exactly who you're going to have. You can really plan for that. If you have an opening pair who both have a preference for pace, then teams can go, okay, fine, we're going to open with some spinners, and then all of a sudden you 2 overs, 12 for 0 with 2 guys having just knock it around, and you've not made the most of the power play because you have 2 guys who would rather be facing pace, and you give them the other side a head start. So that's another tricky thing. So I think ideally you almost just want like different obviously this is how all T20 side building goes. You want different profiles of guys in England at the moment, especially for where this series is and where the World Cup will be. Probably have one too many pace liking guys and one too many spin liking guys. It's also worth saying on Overton, I think that obviously he is coming in 5 overs too early at 7, but England's plan hasn't been to be 5 down after 12 overs every time. Like they're planning for him to come in a bit later, and it's not quite happening. But that doesn't mean the plan is bad, I guess.
Yeah, I think the other thing with Overton is that you might see teams holding back an over of spin for Overton, given how he's gone so far this series. Anyway, that's it for part 1. In part 2, we'll be asking what is England's best T20 side for these sort of conditions, but also a bit on India and how they've gone so far this series. JP asks, what's England's best T20 team for these kind of conditions, including players not in the squad currently? Leading question, Matt.
It is. There's obviously, I think you guys actually might have set it off, but there's been a bit of Joe Root discourse in the past week. I know you guys spoke about it on the pod last week, and I can definitely see the case for it. It is a long time since Root last played T20 internationals. I think we're going 6 years now. And he hasn't played a huge amount of T20, but he has done well in SA20. I think I definitely see the case for it. I think the issue potentially with it is that for me, Root has to bat in the top 3. You could have him as a sort of safety valve number 4, but I don't really see England going down that route, and that means displacing one of Salt, Buttler and Duckett from the top 3, and I don't really see a strong enough case to make that move. The other one is just sort of schedule based in that T20 World Cup comes pretty hot on the heels of an Ashes series away.
He scores 300, average 70 in a famous England win. What better time to get him in for a World Cup?
But we know the reality is that it is generally a pretty grueling time, and I don't know whether that's the move. In terms of the best 11, I think England's great strength in T20 cricket for a long time has been batting really, really deep, which has enabled them to go pretty hard throughout. And we've seen them do that in this series, even when they've lost clumps of wickets. So,
it was extraordinary yesterday how they got up to 170.
Yeah, they lost 7 for 44 in the middle overs. It's incredible to win a game from that position, really. But yeah, scrap their way up. But I think my big change would basically be to try and have one extra, probably batting leading all-rounder, if that makes sense, in there. I personally, I'd have Buttler and Salt opening. I don't really understand why Butler's at number 3. I think maybe it's to shield him from the new ball, but I'd go Buttler and Salt with Duckett at 3. Keep Brook at 4. Controversial one, I'd have a safety valve in there of Sam Curran at number 5 as a left armer. I still think Curran is too good not to be playing international cricket regularly. I know
too good at what?
No,
I didn't mean to be facetious. I mean, in terms of
genuinely
batting and bowling.
as an all-round package, because I think his batting is good enough that it is way better than his T20 international record suggests, because I think he's been used out of position. And I think he would be a valuable fourth seamer, because I think you could genuinely use him with the new ball and only the new ball if you wanted to. And he's also got experience at the death, so I'd have him at 5. Livingston and Bethel 6 and 7. I'd stick with the Overton plan for now at 8. Carse, Rashid, Archer, so leave Wood out.
Interesting.
And that's a really deep team, 4 seamers, left armour in there who can just take the new ball and some spin.
What Baz might say in response to that is, I think the way you've gone around managing your overs is just different to how he does. He would see using Sam Curran as a guy to basically get his overs out of the way with a new ball. It's quite a defensive way of looking at it.
Arguably. I suppose
he's not going to win you that many games in a new ball burst.
You could structure up the power play so you had Curran bowling 1 and 3, Archer bowling 2, 4, 6, and maybe Carse bowling the 5th. And I think that would be quite an attacking move. Get the most out of Curran when the ball's swinging, when he's at his best. If it swings great, it gets you a couple of wickets. If it doesn't, you don't need to rely on him in roles that he's less suited to. But I think as a package, he shows it in every other league he plays, and I don't know whether it's just a quality thing where he's really, really good in leagues and not quite good enough in international cricket. But I would instinctively want him back in there.
Yeah, you've used this analogy before. Too good for the championship. But then Mitrovic came good in the end, didn't he? I guess one of the things with Sam Curran as well, and we have talked about this before, but it's just the fact that he's not in this squad, having actually had a good end to last summer. There is that question of, has McCullum had a look at this guy and thinks like, I'm just not quite sure you're it, basically. I guess if we're being cheeky and we're looking at guys outside the squad, we look at guys who are basically, one of them's retired in Alex Hales having a good campaign in the LT20. You've got Liam Dawson as well for a World Cup in India. Don't need to have that conversation, but I think
he'll be in the squad. You can guarantee that having not been in a squad for a couple of years, they'll bring him back for the World Cup.
Yeah, but then also I guess like I'm interested what this conversation looks like for Tom Banton by the end of next summer, I guess. Given, obviously he's a bit flavour of the week, having got those 200s in the LT20, which we'll come on to more later on. But he was just so good last summer, and he's one of those players who, if he hadn't had his go to begin with for England, there'd be so much clamour for him now based on last year. But there's a bit of like, oh, we saw this guy and didn't he sort of start well and then fade away? But it's like, well, yeah, but that happens to loads of young players, and then
also he was really young.
Yeah,
He
exactly.
was only 20, 21 when he got that opportunity.
And also, I mean, I do think like obviously the cricket purist in me likes a guy who can do it in all formats, but I think that speaks to a player with like actually a robust technique who's not just got a good eye and good hands and can kind of hit a cricket ball cleanly. I think there's a proper player in there, and I think he might well have a very substantial summer again, and then all of a sudden you've got one of the form players in the country across formats for a couple seasons, and you're like looking like, how can we not pick this guy? So he's one that I think will come into the conversation, possibly opening, possibly as at that number 4. I guess we'll see.
I think I think that's interesting. I think to what you were saying about Jamie Overton as well, I think we'll just know a lot more after the IPL.
Yeah, true.
I think he's going to get a pretty good go in the IPL, and
that would be an interesting one actually. Curran versus Overton at Chennai.
I think Overton will play. I think he is on paper just a really alluring option, right? He whacks pace. He's got a really good record at the death with the bat over the last few years, and he can bowl 88 miles per hour. I think there's a big difference with Overton as a bowler when he's bowling low 80s, which he often does, and high 80s. But when he was bowling yesterday, cramping Hardik for room, I was like, I completely see. He's effectively replacing Sam Curran in this side.
Yeah,
and it makes quite a big difference.
The interesting one at IPL is that because it's Chennai and because of how they generally pick, whichever one gets the go first up will probably get a 6-7 game run, and the other one might spend a lot of time running the drinks. So that will be interesting. I suppose I'm trying to think if there's anyone else not in the squad or the side that we've not met. I suppose Jax is an obvious one, who sort of hasn't quite done it in international cricket so far, but you could see making a strong case. Jamie Smith we've not really talked about yet, and I think is a very promising option, but again, we'll probably know a lot more once he's and also he's playing a lot of Test cricket over the next year, isn't he? Someone like Reece Topley sort of seems like he's probably done. Maybe he's obviously faded from the England setup.
What I find quite interesting is the Seamer bench strength because
Mahmood's not played a game, has he?
Which is interesting.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I've never been sold on Mahmood as a T20 bowler, but I think just England don't have that many other guys who can bowl 140, and like, are their plans different when the first choice 4 that you currently have, even if one of them's unavailable? What does that look like? My best 11 at the moment is just about. I've gone Salt. At the moment, I still have question marks over Salt. I know he's had an amazing year, but that year felt at odds with what we'd seen over a very long time before that, and I don't know if that is his level now, or it was just a really good year
when he got to play loads in the Caribbean.
yeah. And I mean, he obviously had a great IPL, but that was in a very, very specific team setup with Narayan at the other end, who loved left arm spin. So team didn't start with left arm spin to Salt. He's at RCB this year. Likely opening partner is going to be Virat Kohli. So you're going to have 2 right-handers who have a massive preference of pace. So let's see how that goes.
What I would say is, I think, I'm aware that we've got one spot into your team. I would say Salt, I think, has got a lot better against left arm spin. Like he was really good against Akil Hossain in the West Indies, and Moti to an extent as well. I think he's personally, I'm big on Salt. I think it's a good time to buy stocks and Phil Salt when he's just got 9 runs in 3 innings.
Yeah.
But I think he's been arguably England's best T20 batter over the past 3 years, like up there. 18 months. Yeah, up there with Buttler.
I think that's fair. He's opening with Brook in my team. I mean, we talked about Brook's numbers against spin. He averages 52 and strikes at 165 against pace. I've got Root in at 3, Duckett at 4, Butler at 5, Livingston 6, Overton 7 for the moment, and then the same 8 to 11. Duckett against spin in the middle overs. I think you're going to get a lot of spin at that World Cup in the middle overs, and I think Duckett's going to be one of your best players against it. Same with Butler. Obviously, there's been a debate for years over his best position, and I think he's so good you just basically bat him where you need someone the most. And I think at the moment England are struggling for middle order players who are good against spin, and Butler can sort of do anything. Livingston 6, Overton 7. The one I think is interesting is Jamie Smith. He's only played 2 games. We've not seen a lot of him. I think he's someone who could be brilliant, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if we're talking on next week's pod after a Jamie Smith performance that completely changes things.
And I just, on your team, I think Overton, obviously still got Overton at 7, but it's a lot different with Root in there.
Exactly. Yeah. If you're feeling the blues this winter, you need to hear this. 90% of men with low testosterone are suffering the symptoms without knowing why. Over the course of the next month, we're working with Manual to tell you that you might not even have to wait for the cricket season to fix your low energy. 1 in 4 men in the UK suffer from low testosterone levels, and you might be one of them. The at-home blood test kit from Manual is a ridiculously quick and easy way to find out your testosterone levels and what may be causing you to have symptoms like a lack of focus, low energy, sudden weight gain, or poor sleep quality. These are all very normalized symptoms, but can have a devastating effect on mental health when gone untreated. If you've got low testosterone, Manual's doctors will be on hand to help. 30,000 men have already taken their test and are benefiting from their testosterone replacement service, with 86% of patients recording an improvement in their energy levels and enjoyment of life after just 3 months. Why not check in yourself? Try a test kit and save 45% on the test with the code weekly45 at checkout. Ben, our Manual moment of the week was that ripper from Adil Rashid to get rid of the dangerous inform Tilak Varma. What makes him so good?
Well, I mean, he's just a brilliant leg spin bowler who has, honed his craft over coming on to 20 years in the professional game, and you can, I think the part of that is just his hunger to improve the whole time. Obviously, he's gone through stretches with injury where he's kind of been managing himself, and even that sometimes has been kind of amazing to watch. See a guy who's kind of got half a shoulder who is still able to be like a functioning part of, a World Cup winning attack was kind of extraordinary. But then actually when he went away from that and kind of got himself back to fitness, and you saw this guy come back and was able to just basically do anything he wanted with a cricket ball, so bowl it super fast. I remember one game against Sri Lanka where he was clocked at just over 70 miles an hour, or just go so slow and put massive rips on it. I know that Owen Morgan would talk about him as like a variation bowler, kind of like 3 bowlers in one rather than just a pure leg spinner. And yeah, he can just do it all as like an attacking leg spinner, as a defensive leg spinner. He's just an absolute marvel. And he's basically, we talk a lot about, Joss Butler and hoping he stays around and that the captain isn't way too heavily on him. But Adil Rashid is England's most irreplaceable player by a distance, I'd say.
Yeah, his spell yesterday was magic. The control he had over the ball, the way he was toying with the batters. And also, he's actually bowled quite a lot of these spells for England in the last 2.5 years. You go back to their T20 World Cup winning run in 2022. He was absolutely brilliant in the 3 or 4 games towards the end of the tournament that really mattered. Even in the 2024 World Cup, he went pretty well for England. He is so hard to replace, and he's going to be so hard to replace for this England side because he turns 37 quite soon.
But it's a funny one, that, because I was thinking about it yesterday. Because of the fact he has had those shoulder issues, there has been a bit of chat over the past however long about what happens when he's done. I don't think he's going to be done for ages. I think he wants to keep going. I've interviewed him last year, and he, I started floating in that, how long are you going to keep going? And he was like, well, why wouldn't I keep going for the 50 over World Cup in 2027? Why I want to keep winning stuff. I want to keep winning titles. And I can see him going for 3, 4, 5 more years, because as long as his shoulder stands up, and that's obviously a big if, and his body generally, but he doesn't play that much cricket compared to some guys in the England setup. He's very much a white ball specialist, pretty much a T20 specialist. Obviously, he's going to play in the Champions Trophy, but it's not like he's bowling 10 overs most games. It's 4. And I think he's going to be around for a little while yet. I think, as Ben said, I think he's so skilled at reading pitches and working out which type of spell he wants to bowl. And also, it feels like there's a lot of these spells that Rashid bowls, as you say, where he ends up with figures of something like 1 for 15, where teams don't quite, they sort of almost want to knock him around and play him out, but end up not scoring as many singles and taking as many singles as they want. They want to go sort of 0 for 24 off Rashid's 4 overs, and end up going 1 for 15 and think, how's that happened?
Well, he's gone 1 for 14, 1 for 15 off his last 8 overs. And my question for you, Matt, is why has he only played 3 games in the IPL? I want you to sort of defend the T20 stats nerds on this one, because I was watching yesterday and I just didn't understand it. It was like, it was also seeing him have that control over Indian players in India. And you've got, the IPL broadcast team, whatever, mesmerised by what Rashid's doing. And I'm like, how has he only played 3 games? This doesn't make any sense to me.
Firstly, I'd say I agree. In big picture, I think he should have played more than he has. I think if you were to defend it, I think overall his record against India isn't as good as it is against most teams. And I think there is definitely that sort of that slight bias among if you can perform well against India, then you're more likely to get an IPL contract, because you have that sort of availability thing where people have seen it happen with their own eyes. I think there was genuinely a period in the IPL where there was a really, really good stock of Indian spinners, which meant that it was much harder for overseas guys to get a gig, which probably coincided quite well with when Rashid was sort of perceived to be heading towards his peak. I think now, I don't know, potentially age counts against him, and potentially the fact that he has sort of almost seen to have had a go because he's had a few contracts, even though, as you say, he's hardly played. So maybe that's counting against him now, where I think we're heading to a phase where India don't have probably quite as many very good spinners as they used to, and particularly wrist spinners. Guys like Mishra and Pierce Chawla are sort of towards the end. And I think that there are a few teams, as we saw in the auction, who are going to go in with overseas spinners this time. Like I think Rajasthan are going with Hasaranga and Tikshana, Mumbai going with Gazamfa and Mitch Santner. So it does feel like there could easily have been a spot for Rashid this time. Yeah. But clearly, for whatever reason, he's I think he's always been someone who's, and maybe it's partly because of the fact that England has no history of producing leg spinners, and suddenly you've got a guy with over 300 international wickets. English cricket rates him so highly, and I think the rest of the world rate him a little less highly.
Yeah.
Potentially fairly, potentially unfairly.
Well, I'd say unfairly. And I was just looking at the overseas spinners in the last decade. So since Rashid returned to the England team and how many games they've played in the IPL. And some of them, you understand, Rashid Khan 121, Sunil Narayan 130 games. Then after that, so Imran Tahir's played 53 IPL games in the last decade. Is he that much better than Adil Rashid? Mahesh Theekshana has played 27 IPL games. Don't get me wrong, he's a good bowler, good value as a player to watch at a World Cup. But Hasaranga's played 26. Is he a better bowler than Rashid? Obviously, Hasaranga's got his batting, I suppose. Noor Ahmed's already played 23. Adam Zampa, I suppose you could say, he's not played loads. He's played 20. Mujeeb's played 19. Mitch Santner 18. Ish Sodhi's played 8. Tabraiz Shamsi 5. I think Rashid has been hard done by that.
I think there's definitely a sort of shiny new thing to some extent in some of those guys that were sort of played a lot when they're coming through quite young. I think a lot of it's a tricky one, IPL, because you obviously have those 3-year cycles where people sort of try and think long term and actually sometimes lean too far long term when they should be thinking short and medium term, because often you only have the job for 2 or 3 years.
Yeah. Another spinner who feels like has come on leaps and bounds recently is Varun Chakravarti. 10 wickets in the 3 games of the series so far, including a fifer yesterday. He has 2 fifers in T20 internationals, both in defeats. Rob Smythe got in touch to say, I checked and I think Varun is the first Indian player, men's team certainly, to win a Player of the Match award in defeat in a T20I. 2 players have done it twice. One Jersey leg spinner, Benjamin Ward, and number 2.
The other. Yeah.
Go on.
Shane Watson.
Yep, it is Shane Watson. 2 amazing scorecards.
Yeah.
So the first one was in a game against England at Adelaide in January 2011.
Was that Woke's winning runs, or is that another game on that tour?
It is Woke's winning runs.
And 50 and 4 for Shane, is it?
Yeah, so 59 off 31 in a score of 157 for 4.
Which was such a 2020 score.
So who are the criminals in that side? David Hussey 28 off 27. Aaron Finch at number 5, 15 or 14, not out of the death. And yeah, you're right, Chris Woakes winning runs at the end for England. That's one of them. And then the other one was against India in 15-16 at Sydney. So Australia scored 197 for 5 off their 20. Watson 124 not out.
Off loads of balls though, right?
Off 71.
Yeah, so he's faced 12 overs, but still, yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
He's done okay. And then India win it off the last ball, 3 down. Suresh Rana 49 off 25. But Watson with the ball, 1 for 30 or 4 overs. Can you name the Australian attack from that day?
15-16. Oh, God. No.
Okay.
So
Sean,
Kane Richardson.
So Sean Tate took the new ball with Scott Boland.
Really?
With Scott Boland. Shane Watson first change. Andrew Tye. Cameron Boyce 2 for 28 off 4, and Glenn Maxwell with 1 over of off spin as well. Amazing Australian team actually. You had Khawaja opening the batting with Shane Watson. Sean Marsh at 3. Maxwell 4. A very young Travis Head at 5. Chris Lynn at 6. Cameron Bancroft with the gloves at 7. What a team that is. Anyway.
The Patreon is just hours of this. Just Yas lifting off cricket teams and being amazed by it.
Ben, Tilak Varma was absolutely brilliant in the second game, almost winning that game single-handedly. Rashid was the guy who eventually got him out in the third game. He is another potential batting superstar for India. I mean, his T20I record is already brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, they've just got so many of them. I mean, and I was going to say, he's not doing the same things. He's got a couple T300s, isn't he? Abhishek Sharma. But watching him just in the power play yesterday, I was like, wow, this guy's also really, really good and is kind of maybe, well, I guess I'm trying to work out with Rohit, Kohli gone. I guess they are just trying to work out actually what that first choice team looks like, because there are just so many guys who could be in there. And I think what we are seeing now is what we probably expect to come a little bit sooner, which is just the IPL making India, like, by some distance, the best T20 side in the world, because they just have such incredible depth. And I think partly that's also been a factor that's also been helped by how they've approached it in international cricket, where they've just rotated so much, which is why you have a guy like Tilak Varma who, probably now first choice, I guess, but there was times when he wasn't first choice, but was playing a fair chunk of T20I cricket because they were, Kailaam Rohit didn't play a game for a year, that kind of thing. But yeah, he is so good, and you can say it for a lot of them. And it's amazing that England won one game on this tour, I'd say.
Yeah, I mean, Matt, a lot of our listeners probably don't follow the IPL at all, so a lot of these names will be new to them. Who's the most exciting of the young Indian batters, do you think, in T20s?
That's a great question. I mean, well, one of the ones that we've not actually seen in this series is pretty exciting in Yashasvi Jaiswal. Yeah. And you could say the same about Shubman Gill as well. I think Abhishek is probably the most unusual in that he is completely off the leash in a way that you probably fairly rarely see an Indian opener in particular. And also is sort of he's got a real crowd of admirers who have been there for quite a while. So I think Brian Lara has described him as one of his favourite players anyway, having obviously worked with him at Sunrisers briefly, which is a pretty good guy to have in your court. But I think Tilak's right up there because of the fact that he sort of has such range, I suppose. Like that was not an innings, the second one that you see played very often by someone as young as him and as inexperienced as him.
And also the range of shots as well. There's one flick off the hip of Archer that I think was 150 Ks. Yeah. That I was like, what? Yeah. You are so good.
Which was not quite a slog sweep, but it was not far off.
Yeah.
It just sort of almost looked like it was pure instinct. But yeah, I mean, you could take your pick of them, really. It feels like, again, I think almost the biggest dilemma is going to be how do you get all of these guys into a side? I mean, someone like Sanju Samson has done so well in T20 internationals over the past year and is probably straight to the bench when they're full strength, I would imagine.
Yeah, and also it's creating an environment where players feel like they've got time in the team. Yeah, because the strength and depth is so immense that players in T20 cricket in particular don't want players fearing for their place all the time. And how do you have that balance in giving opportunities to these amazing players who aren't in the team, but also making it feel like the guys in the team are actually getting a good run? Anyway, that's it for part 2. In part 3, you'll hear from Mark Butcher. Butch, new year, but an age-old problem for England. England are struggling against spin in India. Varun Chakravarti's been the star man, and at times England look like they can't pick him. What have you made of England's approach against spin this series, and what do you think they can do differently? Because poor old Jamie Overton keeps coming in probably 5 overs too early.
I mean, yeah, very, very tricky. If your sort of lower order finishers are coming in too early. We've been seeing it happen. I've been seeing it happen far too often in the SA20 when lots of wickets have gone down in the first half of the innings, and then you're left with guys who are hitters basically having to do a batsman's job, and it doesn't bode well. Look, I think the issue is, listen, it's very, very difficult, obviously, but I think that the approach, and I was speaking to Robbie Uttapur about this a couple of days ago. He sort of was very much of the opinion that you need to play more on the back foot. You need to be more, almost back on your stumps. Give yourself, if you're not picking it off, out of the hand, then you need to give yourself a bit more time to pick it off the pitch. Most of these players now have the strength to be able to, if they back far enough and they're sort of more dominant on that back foot, that if the ball is that little bit shorter, they can hit it with a straight bat over mid-off and mid-on. They don't have to be going at it to have the power to clear the boundaries if the bowler, bowls an indifferent delivery. And I think basically that the batters have got to think about it in terms of sort of allowing the ball to come at them a little bit more, try and play back as often as possible, get them then to get full on you where you can then jump on the front foot and smash it. I mean, a lot easier to say than to do, but I would imagine that if you're having real difficulty kind of, picking it, the last thing you want to be doing is getting out, either going out of your crease, going on the front foot, or committing yourself to the front foot, because from there, it's very, very difficult then to find a gap just to score a single, let alone, hit the big shot. So that would probably be the advice, given what's happened, given what I've seen, given the pitches haven't been, they're not spitting cobras. It's not been that the decks have been unplayable in terms of their dryness and their turn. But I think that committing to the front foot too soon is probably the issue.
Throwing it forward 12, 13 months, we've got a T20 World Cup in India and Sri Lanka. Out in South Africa at the moment,
It's good practice.
I was going to say, so Joe Root's Pile Royals created history in becoming the first team to bowl a full 20 overs just using spin. And Root himself is going okay with both bat and ball. How tempted would you be to bring Root back into things, particularly or specifically for a World Cup in the subcontinent?
Yeah, I mean, never say never. And I think one thing that you know from McCullum and Stokes is that they're not shy of kind of going against what conventional wisdom is not quite the right phrase, but going against decisions that have been made in the past and deciding that actually for this particular assignment we need something that we'd moved on from. So it wouldn't be the maddest thing in the world. I mean, he's still a fabulous player, and beautifully, I might add. Thank you for your question. It plays in rather well with the idea of playing the spin a little bit more off the back foot than the front foot. I mean, Joe, who's better at doing that than Rooty, getting the guys to actually over pitch before he commits himself to come forward. So not beyond the realms of possibility.
What's going on with the pitches in South Africa at the moment? Because last year's tournament, it felt like teams were getting to 200 every other innings. And this time, barely anyone's getting to 200 and spin's dominating.
I don't know. I mean, partly to do with pitches, but also I think to do with like the relative strengths of most of the teams. There isn't a massive amount of fast bowling knocking around, or sort of, South Africa's traditional strength. A lot of the guys are injured. You've got no Nortje, no Coetzee, no Berger, no, the injury lists, and that's just JSK. The injury list for sort of like your genuine quicks is pretty heavy. And a lot of the teams have overseas spin bowlers. Majiba's been going great, as you would imagine. You've got, who else do we have? They've got a lot of actually very decent one-day sort of left-arm spinners knocking around. George Linder's having a good tournament. And a lot of the team's strengths actually play more into to bowling slow, taking pace off than they do to pace. Couple that with sort of some wild and woolly weather that we've had up on the high veld, and a lot of very, very hot and steamy weather everywhere else. The pitches have been sort of on the drier side, and it hasn't been, not that the crowds have felt it, because they've had a great time, and by and large the grounds have been full still, but we haven't had a massive amount of sort of like thrilling games or thrilling finishes, which rather gives the lie to that old chestnut about low scores mean good games, because they simply haven't here.
But back on the India series, someone who's just very interesting to watch at the moment is Jamie Overton. Hasn't played a lot of international cricket, and he's in an odd role in that he's batting at 7, and until the last couple of years wasn't really much of a batter in T20 cricket. But interestingly, he's actually bowling more than people perhaps thought he would before this tour. Sam Curran, in his last 20 or so games for England, only completed his full quota of overs once in a T20. Yesterday, Overton took 3 for 23 off his 4, bowling a really awkward length, bowling at good pace. He's quite an interesting prospect for England, and he's got a massive 6 months with the IPL coming up as well.
Yeah, I mean, putting those two names together is provocative. But I think even if Curran and Overton were playing in the same team, they would complete completely different roles. Sam Curran fulfilling what he would consider his best suit as a cricketer would be sort of batting top 6 and maybe bowling with the new ball, and perhaps at the death. Whereas Jamie Overton is much more a classic sort of lower order power hitter, somebody you want to come in and finish things off for you with a real flourish, somebody dangerous to come in at the back end of an innings, and a middle overs bowler who would hit the deck really hard, make things uncomfortable for batters, with extra pace and bounce. So they're completely different cricketers. Hence, one has been preferred over the other, because the things that Sam Curran does best, England feel that they have other cricketers who fulfil that role better for them, or at least they don't need him to bowl with the new ball, and they don't need him to bowl with the death, given the bowlers that they have available and fit right now. And also they don't feel that he's quite as good as the other guys they've got batting in the top 6. So that puts his position in jeopardy. It's certainly no reflection on what he does well as a cricket player, but it just means that what England need right now is not him. It's more what Overton does. And his figures in the win last night, or the most recent, kind of bear that out. He came on as 5th, or the 5th bowler, 6th bowler, bowled through the middle, was very economical, and picked up 3 wickets, doing a sort of a Liam Plunkett style job, I suppose. And I think it was I think if we go back in the archives, you'll hear me saying that I think it's a very smart switch, simply because he brings something that England do not have or did not have up until this point. So great news that he's fit and able to bowl. If the top order scored a few more runs and got him in when they need him to be, when they picked him to be in, then perhaps you can see how effective he might be down at the end of the innings, swinging with gay abandon. But him being a batter is against spin in the middle. Well, that's that's not his job.
Absolutely, that's not what they picked him for. Yeah, I lumped those two guys together just because that's how England have typically used Sam Curran. England have typically used Curran as someone who bats at 7 and is predominantly in the side for his bowling. I'm just going to ask, actually, do you think Curran's been hard done by a little bit? Because it felt like he just turned a corner at the end of 2024 with an outstanding home summer in both the Blast and the 100 with the bat, and then actually showed signs that he was just about getting there with the bat in international cricket on that tour of the Caribbean in November, December.
In the Caribbean, yeah, but look where he was batting in the Caribbean. He was coming in at 5, and again, I with all the best will in the world, I don't see him batting in front of the guys that we've got there at the moment. Now that could well change. You know, he might end up being picked more for his batting than his bowling, but right now England don't see it that way, and so therefore he's on the outside. I think he's been hard done by to a fashion, but logically it makes no sense for them. It made no sense for me. Remember, we had this conversation during the 50 over World Cup about Sam Curran and how he was being used. And Sam took a bit of umbrage. He thought I was having a go at him. It wasn't personal. I was just saying the things that they are asking him to do is not what he's best at. And again, you go back to the tour in the Caribbean that you just mentioned. He gets a chance to bat sort of top order, bat for longer periods of time, play more of a batsman's role, and he's certainly more suited to that than he is coming down. I'm sure you'd have the numbers, but when he comes in 7, 8, whatever, as a sort of like a slogger at the back end, no productivity at all. And that's not a reflection on him. That's a reflection on him being asked to do the job that he's not equipped to do.
Well, it's been a really good series so far. 2 T20s to go and the 3 ODIs as well. Butch, cheers for your time. Catch you next week. Matt, the sale of the 100 is coming up soon. We've had a lot of chat around this recently. Is it near the end?
Yeah, absolutely. I think over the next, what is it, at time of recording, about 12 days or something like that, we'll actually get to the nitty gritty of it. And starting Thursday, so tomorrow at the time of recording, we're looking at a short list of 2, 3 or 4 for each team, coming down to either sealed bids or a sort of live virtual auction process. And at the end of that, those partners will enter into a period of exclusivity and thrash out some fairly dull contractual stuff and work out exactly what their future looks like. But we're very much talking about, either private equity or tech consortiums or IPL franchises entering into these joint ventures with the 8 host venues and becoming fully invested in the 100, which is going to be a fascinating thing to watch play out, I think, over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years.
Yeah, I read your piece yesterday on this. Was it yesterday or the day before?
Great headline, by the way. 100 investors express frustration at ECB's pure financial motives. It made me think, what does Richard Thompson... What do they think? Does Richard Thompson just really want to see better death bowlers at the Welsh Fire? What else would the motivations be?
Well, I guess, but this was the question I was going to ask Matt, is that there was one way of, I think that maybe it felt like some team owners seeing the process, which was that they want to, present a holistic package, part of which would obviously be financial, but part of which would be, we have this vision for cricket or for how, Welsh Fire can be part of the Welsh region of cricket and that kind of thing, and can maybe be like a community hub or that sort of thing, versus like another way of looking at the sale process where basically you make sure your potential owners aren't complete wrong-uns, essentially. And then beyond that point, it's just, highest number in a sealed envelope. And there were some team owners who were putting a lot of effort into the first part. and now realising that essentially it's just the second thing and being like, well, why did we bother putting some effort in? We could have just put in the bare minimum, stuck loads of money in front of you and done that. Is that essentially how it seems?
Yeah, I think so. I think the frustration from the investors that I've spoken to who sort of raised these issues was exactly that. They said, we've spent 4, 5, 6 months making presentations, getting the detail on exactly what our partnership with this particular team will look like. This is our vision for this team. We've had what we feel are good meetings. We've built good relationships. And now we're going up against either 1, 2, or 3 others who may or may not have done the same extent of that. And it's just going to be about what the biggest number is in the envelope, which I can see why you'd be frustrated with that. I can also completely see the ECB's point of it, which I tried to get across in there, which is that they feel as though they've had 100 or so expressions of interest in the first round, and they've got it down to a short list of somewhere between 10 and 15 possibilities now. Only the good ones are left in. All of the host venues have said we are happy to work with and enter into a partnership with the very small number on our shortlist. Therefore, they feel as though they have filtered it out, and it's not just about cash. And I don't know. I think that one of the difficulties that I've found reporting on this whole process is that you can sort of always see it from both sides. In that, if you think of an estate agent selling 8 houses and they originally get 100 people saying they're interested, of course, throughout the whole thing, there are going to be people who don't end up with a house or fear they're not going to end up with a house, who think, what a joke that I'm not going to get the house I want, when actually there's probably no good way to do it. It's a bit like the Glastonbury ticket queue. People always moan about the process for that. And it's like, well, there aren't enough tickets to go around. Of course you're going to get annoyed. Of course some people are going to miss out. Yeah. That's how it works. And that's one of the challenges here. But yeah, clearly I don't think it's been a completely seamless process, but it was probably never going to be, given how much is at stake and how long it's been as well. There are always going to be some friction there.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out over the next couple of weeks. Other cricket, West Indies became the first ever side to beat Pakistan in the Norman Sajid era. It was also West Indies' first win in Pakistan since 1990. An extraordinary game. West Indies 38 for 7 on the first morning after Norman took a hat-trick. Before, for the second time in as many games, the top 3 West Indies scorers were their numbers 9, 10 and 11. 2 weeks ago, that had never happened in Test cricket. West Indies have now done it twice in 2 tests. The down bad derby really living up to the pre-series hype. Jamal Warrican took 9 for 70 across the 2 innings in that game. Amazing looking at the last scorecard of when West Indies beat Pakistan in Pakistan. It's before Lara made his debut. Desmond
You're about to read off the number 11.
I was going to read off the whole 11, but it's pre-Lara. Desmond Haynes and Greenwich are still opening the batting. Dujon's in the team, Malcolm Marshall, etc. So a long time ago.
Did you see the John Cena stuff going on between Sajid and Jamal Warrican?
This is excellent. So Warrican's basically nicked the Sajid celebration.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think Sajid celebrated by doing the "You Can't See Me" and then doing his trademark one, and Warrican just did exactly the same back to him.
Get your yellow card in the Premier League.
It would, yeah. It's been so funny seeing it play out in Multan as well, because I don't know, you sort of it feels like that trash talking almost should be in front of a massive crowd and everyone should be sort of reacting to it, but instead it's sort of quite a sleepy set of stands. But
and I think that result means that
Pakistan bottom of the World Championship table. And if there's a slight serious point here where obviously Pakistan identified after one test at England series a way that they could potentially win games at home when they had not had any sort of method of winning games at home before that. But you still look at the raw elements of that side, the players they've got, and think that they should be able to win cricket matches in a normal way. And that this obviously, they have 2 very good spinners, so maybe play to that a bit, but also they have some very good pacers play to that, and maybe in a way that means that it's not so much of a lottery that brings other teams into it that they could. And also if they want to improve in all conditions, then if you play half your games on completely kind of alien tracks, that might be a detriment in the long run. But I guess that's for the next cycle.
100%. There's another test match going on at the moment. Australia against Sri Lanka at Gaul. Australia made an interesting selection for the first test. So they effectively dropped Sam Constas for Josh Inglis, who's come into the middle order. Travis Head then went up top. They also picked 3 spinners, Murphy and Kuhnemann in the side alongside line. And it's going, at the time of recording, very well for the Aussies. So Travis Head scored a 35 ball 50 up top. At the time of recording, the Aussies are 273 for 2. Khawaja 125 not out. Steve Smith 70 not out, having passed 10,000 runs in Test cricket with his first run of the day. Matt, I know we said earlier on that the moment of the week is the Rashid ball to Tilak Varma. That was a lie, wasn't it? Because it was obviously Mitch Owen in the BBL final whacking a 30 ball 100 in front of a home crowd at Hobart that I think we can accurately describe as raucous.
Absolutely. And a home crowd that he used to be part of, which I think was one of the really cool bits of it.
Extraordinary social post from Cricinfo. How did you guys know that was Mitchell Owen?
They just picked out a random kid in the crowd.
I think I've actually seen some social content from the Hurricanes themselves where it's up on one of the walls at the stadium. And I don't know whether it's up because someone spotted it was Mitch Owen or because he tipped them off, or whether it is just a cool bit of a load of fans celebrating with George Bailey sort of blurred in the foreground. But it's incredible. I think 10 years on from being a 13 or 14-year-old on the hill to do that in front of his home fans. And I think, also Tasmania is a small place. There was a lot of chat on the commentary through that about whether or not this was Tasmania's greatest sporting achievement and comparing it to state of origin finals and that sort of thing. And but the Hurricanes have been a bit of a rabble for a few years. They've often had what looks like a really good team on paper, and it's never happened at all for them. And they got this guy Mitch Owen, who had a very average. That's probably quite generous. A pretty nothingy Big Bash record before this season. I think he scored 79 runs in the Big Bash.
He could properly whack it.
Opened the batting with him because he got some runs in a practice match, and he was the top scorer in the season. Struck at 200, 2 centuries, and pretty much every other game was getting at least a quick start in the power play, and just incredible.
There's a lot of T20 cricket played, especially at this time of year, but this was franchise cricket at its absolute best. Seeing how invested the fans were, it was, if people weren't watching it, it was on a par with the best atmosphere you've seen in an IPL game. The home crowd was so up for it, obviously, with the context of Hobart playing at home and Hobart never having won anything before. It was so good to watch. You're drawn in by the energy of the crowd.
Yeah, and I suppose this is the challenge that so many leagues have, is because they're so much younger. They don't have that affinity with a place, and they don't have players who have sort of grown up aspiring to them. Whereas in the Big Bash, you do have that obvious affinity to cities, probably more so than here, because of the fact that so much of the population do live in those cities, and because of the fact it's been going as long as it has now. You have that incredible moment where you see someone who has genuinely supported a team since they can remember going on to play for that team, and that's obviously something that happens in sport. You obviously have people in international sport, dreaming of playing for England and so on. You have county cricketers in some cases who have been part of the Surrey age group all the way through, and that's happened in the example of the Big Bash. And I thought it was a brilliant season at the Big Bash. From I watched a lot of it in the mornings here. Great start time, and it's I think having had some really tough years where they expanded, which I think was widely recognised as a misstep, and they obviously, I think, bore the brunt of COVID as well. I think they've now got to a point where they're competing well with ILT20 and SA20, despite the fact that they don't always get the best overseas players, because the Mitch Owen story is so much better than anything that almost any overseas player can offer, I think.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, and I think it was a really good year for the Big Bash more generally. But obviously, the Big Bash is not the only T20 cricket happening at the moment. Ben, what's been happening elsewhere in the world? 90 seconds.
So we're going to start with the Bangladesh Premier League, actually, where the big story is Dubar Rajshahi don't have any money, basically. They didn't pay their local players who didn't turn up for training, then paid them, but then didn't pay their overseas players who didn't turn up for a game. Some of the overseas players in that competition as a whole, just to take two of theirs, they've got Miguel Cummins, who last pro game was in 2022 before this tournament. And then also Lahiru Samarakun, who played one game for Sri Lanka in the second tier Asian Games in China. That's his full international record. Obviously, he still deserved to be paid. So, but then they went and turned over the top of the table Rangpur Riders twice in a row. So maybe
without their overseas stars,
without their overseas,
wow.
so without Ryan Burley, who's been their best player, without Pakistan's Mo Aris. So yeah, onto the ILT 20. Tom Banton obviously good 200s for MI Emirates. We've obviously been big on Gulf Giants. I think we're talking about stocks.
Huge, yeah.
Sell stocks in them. They're not going so well. They're second bottom. Buy stocks in Desert Vipers. There's still a good pod favourite contingent. Obviously, Dan Lawrence, we've mentioned, but Sam Kerr and Alex Hales, Adam Hose, Luke Wood, David Payne. Gulf Giants' big thing this week was Tom Curran gets to just decide when he bats or not.
You can have more than 90 seconds to explain this.
So basically, he got run out. The ball was thrown into Nicholas Poran, who has Nicky P on the back of his shirt. Tom Curran then just sort of walks out of his crease. Poran whips the bells and says, "How's that?" Tom Curran kind of walks off. Andy Flower kicks up a bit of a stink. Tom Curran walks back on and continues batting. It's bizarre. So much weirder than the best thing. And it's one of those things you can tell that even if he's being a bit dozy, he doesn't actually think the ball's dead, because if that ball just bursts through Poran's hands, he's definitely running an overthrow. So there's no way he's thinking it's dead. And he's out of his crease before the ball's in the keeper's hands, I think. Just about. Very, very strange.
It reminded me a lot of that Ian Bell one. Do you remember against India, where I think a fielder slid on the boundary?
He thought it had gone for 4. Yeah.
And then sort of wandered off for tee. And was it Dhoni whipped off the bails and then called him back? So it was a similar-ish situation, but I think Bell's was maybe slightly more forgivable, whereas Curran's was just weird.
Also, I don't know if Bell he probably would have said, like, I was a bit dozy there, whereas Curran was like looking upset about it, which is not really on. Anyway, on to the SA20, where we've mentioned Joe Root still going strong there, and his par royals are top of the table and bowling loads and loads of spin. There was one game, which I think was the first game in franchise history that a team has bowled all 20 overs of spin in a game. Not going so well from an English point of view. Zach Crawley averaging 11. I mean, we didn't mention him in our T20 conversation earlier for good reason, having been, 6 months ago, we might have been saying he'd been open the batting for England white ball formats. Looks unlikely. And we'll end on the Super Smash, and this is one just for pod producer Dan Senior, where the star player there is Tom Bruce.
No way.
Yeah.
No way.
He's the only. He's got the best average and the third best strike rate of any guy with a substantial number of runs. So he couldn't do it in Lancashire twos, but he's doing it over in New Zealand. So good for him.
Tom Bruce, for listeners who aren't aware, was Lancashire's overseas signing for 2024. And
somehow not their worst overseas player of the year as well, given they had Ben Kiaya.
That is also true, but it didn't go great for Bruce. And it's one of those that it looked like what could have been a really canny signing on paper, like amazing first class record. Doesn't play a lot for New Zealand, but New Zealand have a lot of players who haven't played international cricket and do quite well in county cricket. But it did not go well for Tom Bruce, and the comments under Lancashire posts when Bruce got out or was selected to 11 were quite harsh. I think there was one from memory that was something along the lines of we should have signed Fiona. Anyway, good to see Tom Bruce back in the runs. Is that it?
That's. I've missed the competition. I hope I haven't.
It is entirely possible. But no, very, very good stuff. Finally, a question from Alex, who asked, what aspects of T20 tactics would you like to understand more of, but don't know how to find out about, or haven't seen any research or discussion about it? Basically, what unsolved mysteries of T20 cricket tactics are you interested in?
So in the context of Par Royals bowling 20 overs of spin, I for a while have wondered if there should be just quite a lot more spin bowled in T20. Spin basically does better than seam in every phase of the game in terms of economy rate, and pretty similar in terms of average. So maybe it's slightly more defensive, and T20's become, I would say, much more attacking. Like bowlers have become a lot more attacking in recent years in T20. But I think there would be a really interesting, it would probably need some quite serious research on it to work out whether there is a correction to be made in terms of, I would say the standard T20 bowling attack is probably 3 seamers, 2 spinners, whether the standard attack should probably be flipped and be 2 seamers, 3 spinners, because I don't know. I think it's an interesting one, and I can see it both ways. I can see how, maybe the reason spin does better at the death, for example, is actually because only the best spinners ever bowl at the death, whereas some pretty average seamers bowl a lot at the death. But yeah, I think there's a general bias that people remember calls to bowl a spinner going wrong, and very rarely question calls to bowl a seamer going wrong. So example of that would be T20 World Cup. I reckon most listeners can probably remember Will Jacks bowling the second over against Australia for England, going for 22, and I reckon a significantly fewer number will remember that the fourth over from the same end also went for 22, but was bowled by Mark Wood. And you can make the case that doesn't mean that one decision was better than or worse than the other, but I think that people remember when a decision to bowl spin goes wrong, and they don't necessarily when a seam goes wrong.
That's a really good point. And also in reference to our discussion about England's T20 side earlier, Joe Root's actually bowling quite well at the death for Paul. He's done the job in a couple of games and gone okay.
I guess the other thing as well is that like mistakes against spin, like as a batter, you can make a sort of mistake against a quick bowler and still get reward for it. So that's also, so when you remember how it looked in your head, I mean, can't remember that mark over the top of my head, but wouldn't be surprised if there's some, top edges that kind of fly away and you think like, oh, that's a bit unlucky, but actually it's still 4 runs. So actually that's
I mean, that's 100% one of my gripes with T20 cricket is when somebody bowls full and it's an edge for 4 and the commentators say it's unlucky. It's not. That just happens loads. Like that is, you know that if you bowl full at pace, they just need any bat on it and it's 4.
Yeah, especially if you have third man up, then
yeah, no, exactly. I think for me, how to phrase this, I'd love to see more stuff done on dimensions of ground. So are there players whose records are just so different depending on the shape of a ground? Like are there players who are genuinely elite when you have short boundaries, but really quite crap on long boundaries? So the flip would be someone like Sam Curran, right? Sam Curran, player of the tournament at World Cup in Australia, massive boundaries. He's very, very difficult to hit for 6. Brilliant. Doesn't go as well on shorter boundaries. Are there players you can almost categorize as like they're certain type of boundary size players? It feels like there must be more examples of that out there, and I know that a lot is done on dimensions in terms of strategy within the game, but actually could you construct a side more generally around player strengths and weaknesses depending on boundary sizes?
I'd also add to that sort of similar point, what we see quite often, probably less so at World Cups, but to a certain extent, but more generally in leagues where you have a lot of games played at a certain venue, you have a lot of games where there's one side that's significantly shorter than the other, and you often have a win factor sort of counteracting or exacerbating that. I would love to see, it would be really hard to isolate because of the fact that teams change their strategies so much because of it, but whether teams change their strategies enough to reflect the boundary sizes, or are there times where they get far too sucked in and do everything about, protecting, only bowling so you get hit to the long side and never bowling a ball where it risks a batter hitting you to the short side. I really I wouldn't know where to start in a project on whether that's something that is sort of people get too obsessed with, but I've definitely...
Players talk about it loads, right? So like for example, Overton, for example, I remember him talking about his role at the Strikers last year, and he said his job was basically to bowl the really ugly overs in the middle where you had a short side and a right-handed leg side, and that's really hard to quantify. But I think stuff like that, I think that's what I'm trying to say about the dimensions as well. There's lots that's already taken into account, but I'd like to see data on it, and things like dimensions, both more generally for the size of the ground, but also when you bowl to a short side must be really difficult to quantify, but I'd like to see more on that. Ben, do you have any others? Well,
yeah, it's sort of similar in that trying to figure out how to represent it in the data, but it's more about batting partnerships. So I guess one example of this, and I think teams are doing this a bit more, but I've sometimes felt that, say at the death, batter, like if you got a set batter and, a number 9, and the batter will kind of, cloth one out and it will bounce the fielder and they'll kind of just run the single. And it's like, well, what's the best case scenario in that situation? Basically, that the other guy hits a single next ball and gets you back on strike, or you have whatever percentage you think you have of hitting a boundary if you don't take that single. what is the way of maximising your runs in that situation. And it feels like more players are taking the decision on to be like, okay, I'm going to be the guy to hit the runs here. But then also sometimes you can look at like a player's score in isolation and say that this guy scored at, say a guy scores at a runner ball in the middle overs, say, and you're like, well, that's bad. But actually, if he's getting a single every ball and maybe against a type of bowler that his batting partner is very strong against, that can actually be a very valuable thing to do, because you're minimising your time on strike, getting someone else to maximise that time and be able to really take full toll of it. But that, again, you don't see that, or it can go the other way. You can soak up the runs. You say you're able to go, a lower strike rate but survive against a type of bowler your team is overall weak against, and they would run through the rest of your batters. That, again, could be a valuable thing to do.
Yeah.
But actually just comes out in the wash, as this guy, ate up loads of balls in the middle, and was that the reason that his team struggled? I think there can sometimes be a bit of that I wonder if we're not examining enough, basically. Yeah,
a good example of that would be the first T20 of the Women's Ashes, where Knight was going at a runner ball when England needed tens, but because the way Dunkley was back at the other end, England were going at an absolutely fine run rate. You almost want someone's average partnership run rate.
Yeah, there's some tricky bits as well where I remember probably before he massively reinvented himself as a big six hitter, there was a point where Chris Jordan wouldn't score that quickly in T20s, but would often bat sort of surprisingly high when England had a load of bowling all round. So he would be above people like Willie or Tom Curran or whoever it might have been, probably talking 3-4 years ago now. But I remember Morgan would always explain it as he was really, really good. Obviously, he's very, very quick between the wickets, and he was really, really good at getting the set batter back on strike, which is a curious one where you'd think the way that England play, that wouldn't necessarily be the ideal option. But he was always firm on, no, we want Jordan in that death scenario, because, he's very good at finding one or turning one into two in a way that some of the other players in that side probably weren't.
Yeah, and actually on that, another thing that I'd love to see data on is, like, can you quantify how much worse a set batter gets after a number of balls where they're not facing? So you see it loads in 100 where a guy who's set just doesn't face many balls. Can you actually quantify that, like, when that player who's set then next faces, what's their strike rate after that gap, basically? Because as a bowling side, you try and do that. You try and stop the guy who's doing well facing. But can you actually quantify that? Anyway, I think we've probably gone too nerdy there. Anyway, next up, Katya chats to pod favourite Dan Lawrence about his winter so far, getting back into the England side, and his 3 tests against Sri Lanka in the summer.
First of all, Dan, you must be glad to be in the Dubai rather than slumming in the UK January at the minute.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been trying to avoid the English winter from about November onwards. So, yeah, very lucky to be playing out in the sunshine in Dubai.
Yeah, it's been a busy winter for you. What, Abu Dhabi T10, BBL, and now ILT20? Are you not exhausted?
No, I'm loving it. I haven't actually had the chance to have a full franchise winter yet in my career. Obviously, I've been touring quite a bit with England, and so I'm trying to maximise every opportunity that I can get my hands on. And I'm really enjoying the setup here, and it's really fun to be a part of.
What's it like transitioning from the BBL, where you were last in Australia, to the ILT20? What are those kinds of differences?
Obviously, the wickets are quite different. In Australia, there's typically a little bit more bounce, and the bowling is more heavily swayed towards pace bowling. And then when you come here, although the wickets have been quite varied, it still probably favours spin and slow balls into slower surfaces. But thankfully, having a bit of experience playing in the T10s and the IL before, you kind of get to know what all the wickets are going to do.
And what's it like coming straight into that new setup with very little time in between leagues? It must be quite. I mean, you mentioned playing with England and also with Surrey over the summer. It's very different having that kind of relationship with players and building up that kind of plan to just hopping into different setups. What's that been like from an ILT20 point of view?
Yeah, I mean, well, firstly with Surrey, they kind of understand that all their franchise players that they're contracted with that franchise for that period of time. So, as long as we're sort of ticking all the boxes that Surrey need me to do and all their players, they're happy. And then luckily for me, I played for the Stars last year as well. So the environment was something that wasn't new to me. I knew all the players, I knew the coach. And then the Vipers, I also played a couple of games for last year as well. So there wasn't too much getting to know all the coaches and players. It was very much going into an environment that I was aware of. And yeah, that just allows you to go out there and be as free as you can when you go out and play.
With the volume of overseas players in the ILT20, though, that must be quite something to come into as a setup.
Yeah, it's incredible. Obviously, with 9 overseas players in each team, that the standard of cricket is as good as I think you're going to play. If you look down the list of every single team, that there's world-class players in every single one. So we're off to a rollicking start at the moment, the Vipers. We've got an unbelievably well-balanced side, and long may it continue.
And having that kind of quality, I mean, looking down the Vipers list, you've got Windies Ranga, number 3 T20I bowler in the world, Mohammed Amir, Alex Hales. What difference does that make to training and playing in that kind of league when you've got those kinds of players all kind of around you?
Yeah, I think it's just important to try and take little nuggets and learn from all of these superstars that you're playing with, whether that's with the bat or the ball, learning how they tick in franchise competitions and their mindset and just trying to take a little bit from all of them. We have some, like you said, some world-class players, and for it's really fun to watch and to try and learn from them. It's really important.
And you've had a pretty good start. 70 in the first game against Knight Riders, 49 the other day. You do look like you're enjoying yourself.
Yeah. I'm in a pretty good place with my T20 batting at the moment. It's something that I'm really trying to push. Obviously, I'm realising that in the next few years there's going to be more opportunities for me. So I'm going to really, really try and enhance my T20 game. And thankfully I've got off to a nice start in this competition. With
more opportunities in T20 cricket over the next few years, is that with a view to franchise leagues or getting into international England setup again?
Absolutely. Obviously my dream is to always play for England in any format. Obviously I've had a taste of it in Test cricket now, and there's no reason why I can't play in the white ball setup as well. But I feel like I need a good couple of years of proving what I can do in this format of the game, and then see what happens from there.
Do you see franchise leagues like the ILT20 as the way to get into that England white ball setup, in addition to the English summer as well?
Yeah, I think it all helps. Obviously, if you do well in our home competition, our Blast and the 100, it certainly goes a long way to being selected in various squads. But I think if you're also putting in performances against some proper teams in this league, then it certainly helps your cause, and especially if I'm managing to bowl a couple of overs as well, I think that always helps.
There's obviously been a bit of noise around English players and franchise leagues over the last couple of months with the ECB's NOC policy or the changes that have been made to that. What have you made of the way that that's been handled by the different parties involved?
I can kind of sympathise with both parties. I can understand that the ECB want to protect the integrity of the game, and I do understand that. But I also sympathise with the players who can only play for, say, 10, 15 years, right? And then you do have to maximise your earnings. So I can sympathise with people who want to go franchise only, because you do ultimately have to maximise your earnings. And I can also sympathise with the ECB. So it's a very tricky situation at the moment, and I'm not sure there is a correct answer.
You said that something you've wanted to do is the franchise winter, or the full franchise winter that you're doing at the minute. Does it worry you that policy might then be expanded further and impinge on your ability to do that over the winter?
Not necessarily, because I'm contracted to Surrey, and that's ultimately my number one priority. I'm a part of a potentially record-winning side at Surrey, and it's an amazing opportunity to play for that club. So first and foremost, that's my commitment to them. And then when I do have the free time, thankfully that they allow me to go and play some franchise stuff.
As someone who's not currently involved in the IPL, do you find it frustrating that the IPL has been given that superior status by the policy over like the PSL or the MLC?
Yeah, I think ultimately that's a question for people higher up at the ECB. I'm not actually involved in the IPL, and I didn't enter the PSL draft, so it doesn't actually affect me. Again, like I said prior, I can see the frustrations on both sides. I can see the players' frustration, because they obviously want to go away play some high quality cricket and earn some pretty good money. And I can understand the ECB wanting their players playing in the English competition. So it's a very tricky one.
Sure, it doesn't affect you currently, but looking further ahead later in your career, as someone who currently as well doesn't have a central contract and is in high demand for these franchise leagues, could your head be turned in the future down the line by having to give up your Red Bull contract in order to play these leagues?
I think it's pretty tricky to say. I think in general, I try and take every day as it comes, and it's hard to look too far into the future with cricket, because then you can get down a bad rabbit hole. But like I said, at the moment, I'm just focusing on my cricket at Surrey in the English summers and trying to put in performances to try and get back in the Test team, and then play T20 cricket whenever I can. And then ultimately, in a few years' time, if the situation's still the same, then that's a different conversation.
In terms of playing with Surrey and ambitions to get back into that Test team, where do you think you are realistically currently with that after the summer?
I think, being completely honest, I think I'm a little way off at the moment. I obviously had a little taste of it in the summer, opening the batting, and it didn't do as well as I'd have liked. And that was obviously a big disappointment for me, because that's obviously my main aspiration, is to play Test cricket for England. But all I can do now for Surrey is knock down the door and score as many runs as I possibly can, and really try and enhance my off-spin bowling as well, because that obviously helps in getting selected in a lot of teams.
There was a bit of noise last year over whether championship runs were still the best currency in terms of getting back into the Test side. Do you still see that as your best route back?
Absolutely. I think there's a combination of both. There's a style of cricketer that obviously the ECB are after in 4-day cricket. I think taking the game on is generally how cricket's going anyway. And if you can do that as well as scoring a lot of runs, then I think you're going to get an opportunity.
And your bowling as well comes into that. I mean, I was commentating on some of the early games for Surrey in the Championship last year. That was a hell of a lot of wickets. Did you anticipate having that kind of role as almost the frontline spinner coming into the side early in the season?
I hope so. It was obviously a big part of my move going to Surrey, because obviously at Essex we had a world-class spinner in Simon Harmer, and I didn't quite get the overs that I wanted. And it's something that I'm working really hard on every day. And I'm trying to turn myself into a genuine all-rounder. It's a little bit easier said than done. But yeah, it's something that I'm really, really working hard on, and something that I'm going to continue to do.
No regrets leaving your boyhood club then for the bright lights of Surrey and the Oval?
No. I've said it in an interview before that Essex will always hold a special place in my heart, and I really dearly love that club. But I felt like where I was in my career, I needed a bit of a change, and I wanted to experience playing for, well, in my opinion, probably the best club in the country. And I think a lot of cricketers would agree with me.
Looking back at that kind of Sri Lanka series and the aftermath of that, was it mentally difficult to deal with coming off the field at the Oval knowing it hadn't gone as you would have hoped?
Yeah, it was. It was a pretty tricky couple of weeks. I loved playing for England again, and it was great fun in a fantastic group of lads. But I kind of understood that I didn't score the runs that I needed to. Which is obviously pretty hard to take at the time, but that's professional sport, and there's no real time in cricket to sit there feeling sorry for yourself. You've just got to get back on the horse and train harder and try and get better and get yourself back in the mix.
In hindsight, would you have done anything differently in that series?
No, I don't think so. I think the style of player that I am, I think it's always going to look a little bit unique when I get out in certain ways. If anything, I might have taken the game on a little bit more and not put quite so much pressure on myself. But yeah, it's quite difficult to do that when you're walking out to bat for England. So no, I wouldn't have changed too much. I just would have liked to have scored a few more runs.
And that last innings at the Oval, when you came out in the second innings, do you think you were putting too much pressure on yourself there? What was your mind like coming into that?
No, absolutely not. If anything, that was probably the freest that I've been the whole summer. Yeah, I just went out there and I just wanted to go and enjoy potentially my last knock of the summer for England, and play a few shots, and managed to get a few away. Would have liked a few more again, like I said, but it wasn't meant to be, and just got to work harder to try and get back in.
Did you have any discussions with Baz or with Stokes after that game on how it went and what the options were for you moving forward?
Yeah, I did have a conversation with Baz. We just had a very honest discussion on how my summer went. It obviously didn't go as well as I'd have liked. And Baz just said it's definitely not the end. Keep working hard and and see where we are in the next sort of 12 to 18 months.
But a summer spent in the sun's got to be pretty good at clearing the mind.
Yeah, absolutely. The franchise stuff is great. It is great just to play a different format and really focus on trying to win games for my current team, the Desert Vipers, and whoever I'm playing for, and just really enjoy my cricket.
That is everything for today's show. Cheers, listeners. Cheers, Ben. Cheers, Matt. Good to have you on. We'll be back for our next daily episode, which will be tomorrow after the first day of the Ashes Test match, and then another one on Friday for the England-India T20.